Hello, welcome to Bible Study Methods. This is what I like to call exploring the Bible. I tend to call it exploring the Bible because one of the things that I care deeply about is equipping people to pick up the Bible and read it for themselves. I actually like to think of reading the Bible a lot like feeding yourself spiritually. This is a pretty common metaphor that we use all the time if you've been in church for very long. It's a way of fueling yourself, your spiritual life, is to read the Bible. But the reality is, when you pick up this text, especially if you start at the beginning, it doesn't read like any other book that we pick up off the shelf because it isn't in a lot of ways. It's a whole bunch of books. It's an ancient text. There's a lot of reasons that reading this book is fairly tricky. I think sometimes that we make it more challenging in the way that we do Bible study. It's a little bit like if you were trying to introduce someone to how to cook, and so the first step that you took was to take them to the fanciest restaurant in town. There's a couple problems with this as an introduction to cooking. One, somebody else is doing all of the work, which can be lovely, but then that means that what shows up in front of you feels a little bit like magic, because you have someone who has been doing this for years and years and years, who's devoted their life sometimes, who has so much interest and passion in things. They've built up skill over time to be able to put this plate in front of you, and it can be an amazing experience, but it often is a mystery how they came up with what landed on the plate. And for a lot of us, that ends up making you feel like this is not something that you can do, that cooking is best left to the professionals and you should just go out to eat all of the time. We kind of know when it comes to cooking that that's not actually a great idea. There's a lot of reasons why it's lovely to eat out and why it's not a good idea for that to be the basis of your regular diet. And I think that that exact same thing is true when it comes to the spiritual life of a follower of Jesus. It can be wonderful to go, this is what we do often on Sunday mornings, we go and someone who it is their job to read scripture and prepare spiritual food for you, for us. It's their job to do that, and they have spent multiple years usually in seminary learning how to do it well. They've spent lots and lots of time throughout the week preparing this spiritual meal to deliver to you, but it can start to feel a little bit like pastors have this magical ability to read the Bible that maybe the rest of us don't have. Well, I don't think that every single follower of Jesus needs to be a theologian or a total Bible nerd or a pastor in order to live this life well. I do think that it's important for us to be able to spiritually feed ourselves and not rely on a single message on a Sunday morning or maybe a podcast that you listen to or a conference for that to sustain our spiritual life. In the same way that going out to eat once a week is not in any way going to sustain a healthy body, I think that we need to have for ourselves the skills to pick up this text, to hear from God, to read for ourselves, in addition to going out to eat, going to church and hearing a wonderful spiritually filling meal. I'm mixing my metaphors too much, but I think you know what I mean. I think this is really important. It reminds me a little bit of, it makes me think of the show, The Great British Baking Show. My family was, especially my daughter and I, were in this we just explored deeply The Great British Baking Show. And if you're not familiar with this show, first of all, you need to go look at it. And if you are, it's this baking show. The British accents kind of help. But one of the things that I love about it is you have these amateur bakers. They're not even actually professionals, but they are people who care deeply about baking. They've been doing it at home for a really long time. They've been feeding their families, making beautiful creations, bringing community together, and they compete to see who can make these beautiful things. For me, often I watch this show and think, that is spectacular. Whatever they showed up with is so amazing, and I sit on my couch and think, oh, wouldn't that be lovely? Maybe I will order dessert from somewhere. But I love that my daughter, when she watched this show, had a completely different response. She saw someone making a 3-layer cake, and her response wasn't, well, I can't do that, so I'm not gonna try, I'm gonna leave it to the professionals. She saw the 3-layer cake and she said, Mom, I have to make a 3-layer cake. Please, can we make a 3-layer cake? I love this example because what happened kind of highlights, I think, what we should expect when we come to reading scripture, when we start to do our own spiritual baking. Here's a picture of her and the cake that she made. But if you look at her face, Just look at the delight on her face, the joy that she had of digging in and messing around with ingredients. And the thing that I love about this is she didn't get stuck on the fact that her end product doesn't look like a professional's. What she did was jumped in and just enjoyed learning and was so proud of the fact that she did the work herself. This doesn't mean that she's a professional in any way, but I bet that this girl knows more about baking a 3-layer cake than a lot of us do, because she has actually gotten in the kitchen, made some stuff, made something that is, appropriate for a 5-year-old. I think the older we get, sometimes we get stuck in fear that if our first try is messy, if our first try doesn't look polished and professional, then we're just not even gonna give it a go. And sometimes I think that's what happens when we come to the Bible. If you've been taking Bible studies, especially the ones where you come and you watch a video and then you do a workbook, what you're watching is someone who has often spent years, decades, honing their craft of presenting, honing their Bible study skills, honing all sorts of things to be able to offer this to you. And it can be lovely. The downside is a lot of us watch that and our response is, I can't do that, so I'm gonna leave it to the professionals. And this is the thing that I want to encourage you to not do. I want to encourage you to make a shift and be like Sophia. That when you hear teaching that is encouraging and challenging, that I think that our response could be to be excited to try it for ourselves and to embrace the reality that it's going to be messy. If you're new to this, even if you've been doing this for a long time, the point is not to get it all right or to get it perfect or to win awards when we come to scripture. It's to just get involved and mess around with the ingredients and learn how to feed yourself spiritually, not for it to be right or perfect or exact or something even that you're going to deliver from a screen or from a pulpit. It's to be life-giving. And when we leave all of the Bible study up to the professionals, I think that we miss out on a lot. So that's what I'm here to convince you of, because I have found that to be true for myself. I was about 7 years old when I first opened up the Bible and encountered in this text a person, and have been captivated ever since. And so I don't know if you will become a total Bible nerd. I feel like I'm kind of halfway there and love doing it, but I want to at least encourage you to give it a try, to get your hands messy, to try something for yourself and not be afraid of messing things up or getting something wrong. The whole point is the journey and to just get involved. There's one other thing that I think is really important, and when it comes to kind of this illustration of the Bible as spiritually feeding yourselves, and that's because I think that a lot of stuff that's out there that is presented as Bible study is actually chicken McNuggets. It's the Bible McNuggets of spiritual food, that sometimes, because it is a mystery to us how Bible studies get made and how reading the Bible actually works, that we can often be left at the mercy of whatever the person on the other end of the screen believes. If you don't know the difference between real ingredients and kind of the way that people shove a whole bunch of stuff together and deliver it to you, it can really end us up in some really weird places. And I don't think that this is something that you need to be scared about, but I do think it matters. In the same way that we care about knowing what we're putting into our bodies, I think that it matters to know and be able to at least make a choice about what are you feeding yourself with spiritually. How do you have a clue about whether what's in front of you is turkey or tofurkey? I think that it's the same when it comes to reading the Bible. Do you have enough information on board that when you listen to someone tell you, open up scripture and read scripture back to you and say, this is what this says, do you feel like you have enough tools on board to know, are they actually pointing to you to something that exists within scripture, or are they stuffing this full of fillers and additives and fluff that maybe didn't actually come from the text? Now, I'm not even saying that sometimes there's, motivational things that just inspired us, and it may or may not have actually come from scripture. Sometimes we choose to eat the junk food because it's quick and it's easy, but that does not sustain a healthy body, and I don't think that it sustains a spiritual life. So Welcome to Bible Study Methods, where we're just going to get down to the simple elements of what do you actually need to be able to do this well. Just like you need a fork and a knife, what are the basic things that you need to be able to feed yourself spiritually, to be able to read the Bible well? So I think if you don't have one yet, the thing that you need first is a Bible and probably a notebook. And I will, throughout this, have some papers, some guides that you can print off, or if you're in the in-person class, a notebook that you can follow along. But the reality is that I think that the two essential tools that you need are a Bible and maybe a journal or some way to take notes. And that's all that you need to bring. You don't need to pay extra for fancy books or for extra materials. You can absolutely nerd out if you want to, and I'll point you throughout this class to extra resources if you enjoy that. But I think that the essentials are you and this book. And come join us. We're going to read together. Thanks for joining me.